Some brand new developments to tell you about in the case of a North Carolina man convicted of murdering his estranged wife, with an appeals court now ordering a new trial. The case dates back to 2008. We talked about it a lot then. Brad and Nancy Cooper were in the middle of a contentious divorce. Both had affairs. Nancy reportedly threatened to move back to Canada with the couple's two daughters. Witnesses say they got into a fight one night. She disappeared the next day. Her body was discovered near a drainage ditch about 3 miles away from their home. Now, a map of that very same area was later found on Brad Cooper's computer. It was the only piece of physical evidence used against him in trial. His defense team wanted to argue that someone could have tampered with his computer, but the judge refused to let two witnesses testify about that. Now, an appeals court says that testimony could have changed the outcome of the trial. Let's talk about it with our legal panel. Joining us, Tom Caniff, a criminal defense attorney, and Faith Jenkins, a former prosecutor. Tom, so he's going to get a new trial. That is not the same thing as an acquittal, obviously.
It's not, John, and that's what a lot of people don't understand about the appellate process. I mean, when people hear that a case was reversed on appeal, the assumption is that, well, the defendant walks free into the sunset. What it really means is that he's entitled to a new trial. In this particular case, what the appellate court rested its decision on is that the defendant was denied his Sixth Amendment right to present a defense. In other words, if you're accused in a criminal case, the Sixth Amendment of the United States and the Supreme Court has said part of your rights is to present your own defense. Of course, you have a right to remain silent. You don't have to do anything, but should you want to call witnesses, should you want to present exculpatory information, should you want to take the witness stand, you have a right to do that. And the trial court, by denying this defendant his right to call his own expert witnesses to rebut what the FBI cyber crimes experts had said about what was on his computer, was denied that right.
Faith, we learned during the course of the trial that while Nancy was across the street at this party on the last night of her life, Brad Cooper was apparently on his computer. At least this was the testimony. And one of the things that he did was zoom in on this map, zoom a map of the neighborhood where she was found next to a storm drainage, holding pond. Now, his attorneys say they wanted to argue that someone could have accessed his computer remotely and planted that evidence. Sounds a little far-fetched, but would that have been enough to potentially change the outcome of the trial?
I actually don't think it would have changed the outcome of the trial, but the point that the appellate court made, which I think was the right move here, was to say that he didn't have the right to even present that evidence. He doesn't have to present evidence, but here he wanted to. The state had their experts. They put their experts on the witness stand, and these Google map files were actually key in obtaining a conviction in this case. And so to not allow the defendant to put forth his own expert to say that someone else could have come in and done this, no, I don't think it's a great argument. I actually think the conviction the outcome would have been the same, but those due process rights have to be protected, and he should have been allowed to present those experts and be able to make that argument.
Tom, he told the cops that he was asleep while his wife was at this party across the street. Someone was accessing his computer, presumably him. Does it, all of that still reason enough for a new trial?
Again, yeah, it's reason enough for a new trial because, what the Constitution says is that the defendant has a right to present a defense. If the defendant's defense is, so outlandish, so goofy, then you can rely on a jury of 12 people to look at it and say, yeah, we're not buying that, and now we're going to convict him on his new trial just like he was in the first time. So it's a right to a new trial. It's certainly no guarantee of a new outcome. And the defense's theory is that somebody accessed his computer remotely. Essentially, someone hacked into it. Hey, who knows? Stranger things have happened. Certainly hacking is a big issue right now. It happens every day, probably a million times a day. It'll be the defense's burden if they choose to put on a defense to try and convince the jury that there's reasonable doubt.
Well, it's been 5 years since the murder. He's now serving life without parole. He gets a new trial. The couple's two daughters living in Canada with her parents. Thanks very much, Tom Caniff, Faith Jenkins.
Thanks,
John. Let our viewers know what happens in that case.